Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all see me, and it's thank you first of all very much for joining. This is a ThoughtFox AI webinar on AI literacy. We are recording this session just to let you know, and the recording and the slides and some added extras that we'll tell you all about will be sent to everybody who registered for the webinar today. So my name is Marie Toft. I'm a co-founder of ThoughtFox, and I'm joined on the call today by my colleagues Adele Churchill and Becky Loftus as well, who will be kind of doing our housekeeping for us, keeping an eye on questions and so on. So thanks all very much for joining us today. So just to tell you, first of all, a little bit about myself. I'm a co-founder of ThoughtFox AI, a company that which we set up in November of last year, and we'll be telling you a little bit more about ThoughtFox as we go through the webinar. We're an AI transformation company, and we work with companies, all different types of companies, to help them with their AI transformation. I'm also an adjunct teaching fellow in Trinity College Dublin, and I lecture in AI governance and compliance and ethics and change management in Trinity College. I've been doing that for about a year now, and we take large companies through AI transformation in Trinity. My own background, so I set up Emotionize AI in 2020, saw GPT-3, which was the forerunner of ChatGPT in 2020 when it was released. And we were one of the first startups in Ireland to start working with OpenAI back in September of 2021. So this was well over a year before ChatGPT was released. So I've been working in AI for quite a long time. When ChatGPT wasn't even known as ChatGPT. So what we did was we developed the world's first domain model trained with emotional intelligence at its core. So I've built an AI model, and I was doing this well before the EU AI Act came into any kind of jurisdiction or anything like that. So it's been a fascinating journey about how to actually build AI and build it ethically and build it responsibly. I've been lecturing on AI now as a keynote speaker and a thought leader right back since 2022, really, when AI was still very much getting started. My own background is I actually worked as a journalist and a TV producer for years before I set up Emotionalize, but I'm also a trained psychotherapist, why I decided to train AI in emotional intelligence. And I'm also an expertise in human-centric AI, but the whole governance, ethics, responsible AI, compliance, has been an area now that I've been very involved in for the last few years as well. But when you build AI from the ground up, you get very familiar with all different aspects of AI, and there are so many different aspects of AI which we'll be talking about. So before we jump into the webinar, just a little bit of housekeeping. So you will get the recording, as I mentioned. Anyone who's on the call today and anyone who registered will receive this recording. We're going to go through the information for about 40 minutes, but we are very keen. We have a Q&A at the end, and we're delighted to get to as many of your questions as possible. Please put your questions into the Q&A section of the Zoom, if that's okay. You can engage with us in chat as well, and Adele and Becky will be keeping an eye on that. But if you could put your questions in the Q&A section. Um, Also, then finally, if anything occurs to you, or there's something on your mind, or we can't get to your question, we run out of time, we would be delighted to hear from you. So please feel free to email me directly with any comments or observations or questions after the webinar. We'd be delighted to help you. So let's jump straight into it. Sorry, now just bear with me. Here we go. So I had put some of these questions up on LinkedIn. If you found the webinar link registration on LinkedIn, and these are the questions that everyone in organizations need to be asking themselves now. So, can you list the AI systems running in your organization right now? Not what you've bought, what's actually running. And because the difficulty is that many AI features arrive in updates, and people aren't aware of them. Do the employees in your organization using any AI related tools know that they're actually using AI? So if someone has accepted a ranked shortlist or sent it a drafted reply, or it's suggested a drafted reply, that is AI. And employees are using that and they need to know that. This isn't like I'm saying, it's not necessarily a legal problem. This is a training problem. And then the final question, if an AI assisted decision were challenged tomorrow, who's actually accountable? So we will answer all three of these questions today to give you an idea of how to get ready for this legislation, which is now, as you are probably aware, actually in force. So let's talk about what AI, if AI can go wrong. Um, and we hear a lot of doom scrolling and doomsday about AI. AI actually, in many ways, is suffering from quite a brand and an image problem. Obviously, I use AI every day. It's an extraordinary technology, but it is with great power comes great responsibility, and that's really what this webinar is about. So, look, the obvious one straight away is the output risk that the AI itself produces wrong, biased, or hallucinated results. And this is possibly one of the largest risks. And if you use AI regularly, you're aware of this risk that sometimes it can get it wrong. Now, it's interesting when I first started working in AI, its quality was really not nowhere near as good as it is today, and it tended to get quite a lot of things wrong. I was speaking at a conference in London last year, and when ChatGPT was released in November of 2022, one of the speakers compared it at the time to a drunk undergraduate. If you asked someone something, what would a drunk undergraduate say? Now it's very, very different. Obviously, here now in 2026 and all the new updates we've seen, the quality and accuracy have shot up. But it can sometimes get things wrong if you're aware of this. And there are still people unfamiliar with AI who think it's some kind of magic and believe it will get everything right, and they obviously need to be trained in the fact that sometimes it can get it wrong and its output needs to be verified and checked. The accountability risk. So when an AI assisted decision goes wrong, no one can clearly say who is responsible. This can be opaque, it can be difficult. We're hoping to really shed some light on this for you today. The worst thing you can say, as you'll see under the legislation, is that was the AI's fault. The AI got it wrong. If you generate any kind of AI output, you need to own that output, and someone needs to be accountable for that output. Then the data risk. The AI works from poor, incomplete, or sensitive data, production data, quality records, and customer-facing outputs. Now, if you're using Microsoft Copilot or Claude, and it's pointing at data in your organization to get outputs, and that data is wrong, well, then the output will be wrong. Um, you can point these large language models at data in your organization, or you can basically ask them a question and it will go to other sources, and you have to check both outputs. And then finally, the transparency risk. The organization can't explain why the AI made a decision to an employee, a customer, or a regulator. And this is now in force, these transparency obligations, and organizations need to start their audit trail and looking at what that transparency risk means. So if you're using any form of AI, and this is the whole point of today's webinar, people still think AI is, if you have a license to Microsoft Copilot or Claude or Gemini, or any of these large language models, then you're using AI. And that obviously is use of AI. But I always say AI is like electricity. There really isn't an area of your work that it's not going to impact. There are AI features in Zero, for example. If any of you are using Zero, there's AI in Zero. There's possibly AI in your HR, in your CRM, and HubSpot. There are AI features in nearly every software model that we are now using. So people think shadow AI is just maybe unlicensed use of something like ChatGPT, people putting information, sensitive information from a company into a public facing model. It is that, of course, but it's also employees using software that they use every day without realizing they're now using AI. So there are AI risks already live in your company. So let's look at the risk type. So the inherent risk, something we've already mentioned, that basically the AI model itself produces wrong or biased outputs. The application risk, the whole thing about AI is it's neither good nor bad. It's the way we use it. The application, this biggest threat when it comes to AI is still not AI. It's actually people and how we use it. So are you using the AI in the context it was designed for, or have your employees been trained to recognize that AI outputs need to be checked and verified? And then the compliance risk, which is really what today is about. You are now in scope for the EU AI Act. Some people think this is only for AI companies. It's not. If you deploy AI, which an awful lot of us do, you are now in scope, and you need to have the paperwork. So the types of risk then, there's the operational risk, data quality issues, the input itself. There's the regulatory risk, which we're going to talk about. What AI is your company using, and can people answer? The ethical risk, and we'll talk a little bit about that, treating employees or groups unfairly. And there's quite serious rules around that now, and bias is a big thing when it comes to AI. And then finally, the reputational risk, a decision made with AI input goes wrong publicly. And for many companies, this could be the single biggest threat when it comes to AI. Trust and reputation are something that are very, very hard won. They can be lost very quickly. I used to work for RTE, and in 2023, some of you may remember there was a payment scandal in RTE, and or the trust in RTE plummeted. RTE is still recovering from that. Trust it had built up over generations was lost very quickly. So, if AI makes a bad decision that puts your company into the spotlight, will you be able to recover from that? And what's very interesting about AI as well is we are much more ready to forgive human related mistakes. We will not forgive robot mistakes or AI mistakes. There is a far lower public tolerance for when AI gets something wrong. So let's look at the law and where we stand today, because on the 2nd of August, lots of things changed. So let's just take a quick look at the EU AI Act. Now, I was talking to lots of people about this, including my own colleagues, and what we find really interesting is you probably remember when GDPR came in, there was an awful lot of public information about this. Everybody was worried about it. Everybody was wondering what was in scope. We're always very struck at the lack of understanding or knowledge about the EU AI Act. It is now in force, as you can see. It's actually been in force, elements of it, since 2024. Very quick history of the EU AI Act. Fascinating, actually. The EU is the first economic bloc to legislate for AI. Um, America is way behind the EU when it comes to legislating for AI. Some people think that might be a good thing. They're far more interested in the innovation than the legislation and the regulation. Um, America is taking a completely different approach. Every single state has to legislate individually for AI, and it's becoming quite messy and unwieldy, if anything. But the EU is the first economic bloc. The EU is all over this in many ways because it now recognizes that we sleptwalked our way into social media. We all thought back 25 years ago when it first appeared on our horizon that it was a lovely way of staying in touch with friends from Australia. And 25 years later, we've discovered it's causing a mental health crisis in our children and undermining our democracy. So the EU has said, look, it needs to get on top of this. It needs to make sure its citizens are protected. So the literacy obligations that we're going to focus on today have actually been basically obligation wise since the 2nd of February 2025, but enforcement started on the 2nd of August. So since 2025, if you were using an AI tool, you were obliged to be trained in AI literacy. But everything changed on the 2nd of August, and it's actually been voted into Irish legislation now as well, of this year when enforcement happened. But as you can see, even from the 2nd of August last year, general purpose rules started to apply. Now they apply to the people who actually provide ChatGPT, so OpenAI, Google, Anthropic. The rules apply to them now, and are actually in force. Why people think the literacy thing maybe doesn't apply to them as much as there has been a little bit of to and fro with the EU. And on the 27th of July, measures, the literacy was basically softened in many ways. But people thought that meant it wasn't enforced. That's not the case. So they just changed the language in many ways that instead of saying ensuring a level of literacy, the language now is that, and we'll get through this, is that appropriate measures are taken to support its development. But make no mistake, literacy obligations are now in force, and the AI literacy or the AI office is now open in Dublin. And national regulators are now starting to supervise and enforce. High risk systems, which we'll talk about in a second, obligations for those have been deferred under that omnibus until December of 2027, and we'll look quickly at what that actually means now. So the EU has based its literacy and AI risk on risk tiers. So basically prohibited and prohibited, that's actually been enforced since 2025. So any AI that does social scoring, real-time biometric surveillance or emotional recognition is completely banned. High risk, hiring, credit scoring, recruitment, anything critical infrastructure, medical devices. There are higher thresholds of obligations and risk management for high risk systems. What people are very surprised at actually is just how much AI use actually falls into high risk systems. So I'll give you an example. If you're using an AI, an LLM to, let's say, draft an ad for recruitment, that is not high risk. If you're using a large language model to rate candidates on its own without any human oversight, that's high risk. Okay, so anything that actually can really affect people. And when it comes to financial, we'll look at this specifically. They have very strict rules around high risk systems. Just because the enforcement of high risk systems has been delayed until next year does not mean that you're off the hook if you are using AI in a high risk activity. You really do. In fact, the central banks, and we'll look at this in a second, is actually already enforcing elements of that. So you need to be, if you're using AI in any high risk way, it's better to get your ducks in a row now. So when enforcement comes, you're ready for it. Limited risk then would be chatbots, synthetic content, generative text. There are transparency obligations now. People must be told it's AI. So if there's an AI generated email, and there's no human intervention and there's no human editing, you need to let people know that that was generated by AI. You'll probably see already if you're dealing with a chatbot, if you're a customer, and we are all customers, if you're on Ryanair or you're on any of these, as a, liaising with a chatbot as a customer, it is now telling you that this is an AI generated chatbot. And then finally, minimal risk, so spam filters and so on. But the point is, literacy applies at every tier, including minimal risk. It's not just for high risk. So who's actually enforcing it? So the AI Office of Ireland only opened on the 2nd of August. Paul Byrne is its first chief executive, and the chair and board were appointed on the 5th. So Ireland has chosen a distributed model. There's 15 designated authorities coordinated by the AI office. So if you are in breach of literacy, the investigation will be led by the regulator that already governs your sector. So data privacy goes to the Data Protection Commission, financial services goes to the central bank, and employment goes if there's anything in breach in terms of recruitment, hiring, or ethical kind of looking after your employees, that goes to the WRC. The Central Bank of Ireland, this is really important. I've given webinars for anyone involved in financial services. And so the Central Bank of Ireland is in charge if AI is used, let's say for credit scoring or for, advertising products and so on. And the Consumer Protection Code is already in effect. That's actually been in effect since March 24th. And it's really quite strict. They're saying governance is not just an IT issue. The board must have AI literacy, and senior management must own AI risks. So there are now laws pertaining to this, and if it goes wrong, you need to understand that you are in scope for this if you're using AI systems. So a lot of people think, look, the AI office is open. You're, let's say, running Microsoft Copilot. This is the case that with most organizations we meet, and your employees have not been trained in AI literacy. That doesn't mean that the AI regulator is going to knock on your door tomorrow and demand and fine you for not having it. However, what it's seen as an aggravating factor. So first of all, enforcement is proportionate. Any sanction has to fit the case. The Commission's own words are saying a sanction is more likely where there's proof of an incident caused by lack of appropriate training. So if you have a breach, a data breach, or any kind of breach where all of these different regulatory bodies are keeping an eye on it and AI is involved, that's when they start looking for evidence of compliance and they start looking for evidence of literacy training, which we're going to talk about. So literacy is rarely the headline breach. It's the thing that makes every other breach harder, and much harder to defend. And then there are fines for this, but the fines, of course, are in relation to the breaches and so on. But if you have an AI related incident and you have not trained anyone in literacy, well, then obviously it's going to be much, much harder to defend. Now, this is a kind of a difficult one in many ways because it really is the case, and you can see like the omnibus only kind of came out on the 27th of August, as you saw in the timeline, with the softening of what does AI literacy mean. We are building the plane as we're flying it, and the use of this technology is far in advance of the legislation. Okay, we're all very aware of that. We're all using AI systems, but literacy is only now being enforced since the 2nd of August. And the difficulty is, and even preparing for this webinar and researching it, the Commission itself have promised more guidance on what does literacy mean. They haven't given it to us yet, but this is what they have given us, and this is important. So they've told us this. What is the Commission looking for? So a general understanding that your employees need to ensure a general understanding of AI within their organisation, that you know your role. Are you a provider or a deployer? So I would say nearly every single one of you on this call is a deployer, right? And there are different rules for being a provider or being a deployer. So Emotionize AI is a provider. So we've built an AI model. So we are responsible for its outputs. We have provided that. And all of that, the risk categories around that are much, much higher. Anyone just who bought licenses or are using AI features in your software, you are a deployer of AI. So you need to know your role. Know your risk. Consider the risk of the AI systems provided or deployed. So if you're deploying high risk systems, what does that mean? And build on the analysis, build literacy actions concretely on that analysis, allowing for differences between individuals and the context the systems are used in. So the Commission has come out and said this. What does this mean? This is exactly what we're about to explain. Now, this word appropriate measures, what does that mean? Okay, and this is important. What will regulators be looking for? What does appropriate measures mean? So, what counts and what doesn't count? Let's look at what doesn't count for the moment. And we are working with lots of different organizations, and to be honest, an awful lot of what they're currently doing is in the right-hand column. All right. Even just last week, we're working with this organization. What we do is we go in and we help with AI transformation. We'll be talking about this in a little while across the organization. And what we do is we kind of give very, very good use cases in, let's say, certain departments. And then organizations get very excited about AI transformation and then they roll AI out to everybody. So this organization we're working with at the moment is about to give everybody a Claude license. And what they have is they have an AI policy, quite a good AI policy. We've reviewed it. And what they've said is they've distributed this policy and they've said you need to confirm that you've read the policy. And, then that acknowledgement is on file. That is not AI literacy. That is what's currently happening in a lot of organizations. That is not an appropriate measure for AI literacy under the current legislation. A lot of people, there's a one staff session, but there's no record of who attended. There's generic AI awareness, but it's not linked to the actual systems people are using. Are they using high risk systems? And a certificate issued once and never revisited. So you've ticked that box, but in the meantime, the AI systems maybe have become quite much more sophisticated. The work has changed, and that is not updated. So what does count is an analysis, which we're going to help you with today, of what AI you can actually have and who uses it. The content differentiated by role, which we'll talk more about. Delivery you can evidence, again, which we can help you with. And refreshed as systems change and people join. So let's have a quick look at the AI you didn't buy. Okay, you're aware of course, if you've got, let's say, a Claude license or a Microsoft Copilot license or a Gemini license. So where is the AI hidden? It arrives in an update. So nobody actually bought it, but there was an update that said there's an AI in this software now. Nobody switched it on. People are using auto summarize or autofill without realizing that an AI has done that for them. The terms change quietly. Okay, there was an update that people missed, or training outputs can default to on until someone actually turns them off, and nobody can check it. They can't audit outputs for error bias when they don't know how it was generated. Now, this isn't a technological webinar. All right. So how do you start this process? You work with your tech team, obviously, but there's an awful lot you can do without necessarily being very technically literate. So what did your team stop doing by hand in the last 18 months? That's a real sign that they're now using AI. What tools do you use that write, summarize, score, rank, predict, or recommend anything? Pretty sure there's definitely AI there. Has any vendor added a new assistant, Copilot, or smart feature to a tool you've already had? What is on the team's expenses that would not be found in an IT asset register? And if this tool were switched off tomorrow morning, who would be affected? The level of shadow AI in organizations is quite shocking. And we come across it all the time. We come across senior people in organizations who downloaded AI tools without going through IT, and they're now quite reliant on these tools, but there's no one checking and making sure that they're okay to use them. Um, these tools are very, very powerful and they can really help people in their daily work. And so they're reluctant to give them up. And so this is really important that you find out who has these tools and that they're in use in your organization. So again, a way of helping you try and surface these tools. HR and talent shortlisting and interviews. How do candidates get shortlisted and what happens before a human sees the pile of lists? And if there quite often there is AI ranking those applicants. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you have obligations under the EU AI Act now if that is happening, particularly when it comes to human oversight if it's a high risk activity. Finance approvals and scoring, what approves, flags or routes anything without a person looking at it first. Replies and prioritization. What do customers interact with that's not a person? And are they told? Generated content, what content is generated rather than written? And if it is generated and no one is editing it and no one is overseeing it, then it needs to be labeled as AI generated. And anything with API access, what is access to write to a production system without a human in between? And obviously here we're talking about agentic AI, which is incredibly powerful and has lots of other things that we really need to be looked at incredibly carefully when it comes to literacy. So let's just, what does literacy mean and what does AI capability mean? So you saw what the Commission has said on literacy. It's a little bit vague. This is our definition of literacy that we have honed quite carefully based on our work with organisations. So this is the ThoughtFox definition of AI literacy. So the role appropriate capacity to work with AI systems safely, critically, and accountably, understanding enough about how AI works to use it well, judge its outputs honestly, and take responsibility for decisions made with its assistance. That is the ThoughtFox definition of AI literacy. And one of the things that we find that we know is very important, and even the Commission has said this in terms of your role, literacy isn't uniform. Okay, so the way an admin person will use AI and the way someone on the board and leadership is expected to know about AI is quite different. So our point here is there is no such thing as a one size fits all when it comes to literacy. Critically, the ability to interrogate AI outputs, not just accept them, and accountably. So understanding where human responsibility begins and AI capability ends. So these are the tiers that we've identified when it comes to that role appropriate AI literacy. So foundation. Anyone using AI in any form of software needs to be trained. That's the foundational level. All employees, what AI is, what it isn't, and how to use it securely. A practitioner, license holders, and active users. Quite often in organizations, only some people may have Microsoft Copilot licenses, so they would be practitioners. They would need a higher level of literacy. Operators, development and data teams, model limitations, evaluation, testing, deployment, governance. This is something we work very carefully with organizations on. We do an awful lot of software development lifecycle work, going with Tiger teams, looking at how AI changes that, and they would be operators of AI. And then finally, leaders, we do a lot of work with C-suite and with boards. This is what leaders and boards need to know: strategic risk, regulatory exposure, investment governance, and accountability under the EU AI Act. So as you've seen, the Central Bank of Ireland, so AI boards need to understand AI governance and accountability, and they are liable. So what does an auditable trail look like? A register of the AI systems you have with a classification and a written rationale for each one, including any AI features hidden in any software you're using. Literacy content mapped to those systems and to the roles that touch them. Delivery records, who completed what and when it comes to literacy training. Evidence that this is current, not a one-off exercise from 18 months ago, and a named person accountable for keeping all of the above true. What you're about to start building as you use AI is your AI governance ecosystem. And this is the start. You can start building this today. This will evolve and grow as the organization evolves and grows, and more people start using AI and the tools change. But this needs to be updated in the event of a regulator coming to find out what an auditable trail looks like. So there is a difference, however, between literacy and fluency. Okay, so we've kind of gone through what the threshold of literacy is, and you can see it here again. Understanding what AI is and how it works, recognizing that there is AI generated content, awareness of its risks and limitations, and we established what those risks are, knowing when AI is being used, and meeting the EU AI Act, the minimum of this. Okay. Now we're talking a lot about legislation because the deadline is very much to the center of people's minds. The AI office has been set up, enforcement has begun. We would argue and have been arguing for a long, long time that this is what's called effectively responsible AI. This is not just a compliance issue. If your employees are not trained in how to use AI responsibly in exactly this way, your actual organization is at risk. But if you were to move beyond, and that's what we help organizations do, there is a difference between AI literacy and AI fluency. So you can train people to the bare minimum, but if you really are handing these powerful tools to your employees, and they're not cheap, as you're aware, well, why not give them the best training that you possibly can, and get them and to really maximize their use and get real value from what you're paying for. So this is the difference between literacy and fluency, that you think strategically with AI capabilities. You know when to use it and when not to. You can evaluate and govern different AI systems, that it drives AI informed decision making, and you're now building lasting competitive advantage. There is not necessarily any competitive advantage in having the tools. These tools are widely available and lots of people have them, including your competitors. The competitive advantage is knowing how to use them really well. And in light of that, one of the things that we're building in ThoughtFox is SharpFox. This is a very exciting new AI model that we're actually building, which is a micro learning site effectively that helps build literacy into people's daily use. About 20 seconds a day, a moment lands, and it's living in the models that you actually use. So can run Microsoft Teams. We're looking into Slack and Google Chat. This is at the pilot stage, but this is a fantastic way to help your employees really start building capability and fluency with AI, but also ticking that literacy tick box, which is what we're talking about today. Um, what happens with AI sometimes is there's a lot of friction. You're using something and you have to leave it to go and do a literacy, or leave it to go and use AI. But when you build it into the actual tools you're using, the research has shown that it sticks a lot more. People tend to use it more. One of the big things we come across, people are paying, organizations are paying for all these very, very, amazing and expensive AI models and licenses, and they're just not being used. Whereas if you embed them in people's daily work, then people start using them and they're far more likely to use them. So if you're interested in SharpFox and want to be an early adopter, please, we'd be delighted if you wanted to reach out, and we can chat to you about it. Ultimately, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but ultimately AI is a transformation. It's a human transformation. It's only 70%, it's only 30% technology. It is 70% people and process. We're talking a lot about literacy and compliance today, because that's what this webinar is about. But this is really the single biggest challenge of AI transformation, is that people think it's just a new technology. It's much, much more than that. It's also quite an emotional change for people. And the organizations that succeed invest in their people first. So they build understanding and confidence at every level. They're the ones who are absolutely soaring ahead with AI. Certificates don't change behavior. Managers who model the behavior do. You roll out a literacy program, you're a people leader, you're in charge of a system. if you're not using it and people and your, team can't come to you and ask you questions, but they're not going to use it either. And this is the part that decides whether any of the compliance work actually sticks. You can invest in models, you can invest in AI transformation, you can invest in AI literacy, programs. But if people aren't using it, it's what's the point in actually doing it? And then this final question that we're going to answer. So basically, if an AI assisted decision were challenged tomorrow, who's accountable? It is not the vendor, as we've said. It is not the tool. It is the person using it. You cannot say the AI said that. It's the AI's fault. The Act requires human oversight to be assigned to named people with the competence and the training to exercise it. Every system in your register needs a business owner and a named reviewer recorded. If you can't name that person today, that's the finding and it's fixable. So look, what we don't want to do at all is scare people, right? This is, how does someone eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You are starting to use AI. As long as you're building your AI governance system aligned with that, this will all build. But it's just putting the systems in place as the AI comes on board. And then it becomes much, much easier instead of scrambling afterwards. And what you definitely don't want is people using AI, believing the outputs are gospel, and producing something that can actually put the organization at risk. So the final few minutes, and I only have a few minutes, literally just to tell you a little bit more about ThoughtFox. If you're more interested in governance and you're really worried about governance, we've given you a lot of information today. We will also be sending you an AI inventory to help you start auditing these different systems. So you're getting a lot of things that you can just literally start on your own today. But one of the things we do is literally come in and help you with all of this. An AI usage policy, an agentic AI policy. Agentic AI is quite extraordinary. I use it every day. We help organizations with it. A lot of people are still getting their heads around AI. Never mind agentic AI. We could do a whole webinar on agentic AI. Your system inventory, that's something you can start today. We can help you with that. Even the inventory list you're going to receive, policy to controls matrix, obligations turned into named controls, owners and evidence, cross framework basically different frameworks. So we talked a lot about the EU AI Act today. There's the NIST, and more companies are going for the ISO for 2001. So that's something that we can point, SharpFox can point to that as well. And then an incident playbook. Red teaming is something we help organizations with. What happens when something goes wrong? So you actually decide if the AI gets it wrong, what happens then? And there's a whole system that's already in place. So just to tell you a little bit more about ThoughtFox, what we do is we look at these 7 dimensions. So back to the whole AI transformation is 70% people and processes and 30% technology. So these are 7 areas that we help organizations with: leadership and vision, strategic alignment, governance and ethics, technical capability, people, culture and skills, operating model, and value realization. So we go into organizations and we look at these 7 dimensions. The single biggest, most important dimension, as I've mentioned already, when it comes to success for AI transformation is leadership and vision. It has to be modeled from the top. If leaders are reluctant or not that inclined, that definitely our experience is that trickles down to organizations. You can see where organizations are, we've scored them. So unaware, exploring, developing, defined, managed, and optimizing. Nearly every single organization that we start working with are pretty much at exploring. All right. And there's no shame in that. This is a very new technology. What's interesting though, if you look, level 3 defined is the minimum the EU AI Act effectively demands documented. Whereas an awful lot of companies are still at exploring and developing. So what we do is we help people come up that scale basically, and we go through those 7 dimensions and we help them apply AI transformation successfully. Because when you do apply AI transformation successfully, it is going to transform your organization. We're talking obviously a lot about governance today, and we take governance very seriously, and it's one of our 7 dimensions. And we're talking about governance today because nearly every company in Ireland who uses any form of AI is in scope. But what is not talked about a lot, and what is still sometimes people feel is in debate, is value realization. People still feel AI is a solution looking for a problem. It's not. there is extraordinary value, literally waiting to be untapped by AI. These are just some of our clients, and this is what we've achieved over the last year. So a process that was taking 2 months, AI, through our help, has basically reduced that to 2 hours. A product design stage that previously took 3 to 6 months is now taking 1 week. And one client has seen an 8x return. So value realization is something ThoughtFox is possibly our main area. That when we go in with our first phase, which is activate, we take a use case and we show immediately where the value is. That can be in productivity, it could be in efficiencies, it could be financial, it can be in lots of different ways. But we prove AI value first. And our experience is then the organization wants AI rolled out throughout the whole organization because they can see immediately where that value is. So we are your AI partner. We're not your AI vendor. We are a multidisciplinary team. One of the things that sets us apart from a lot of other AI transformation is that we are all AI experts. You know, I have built AI from the ground up, deployed AI. Our CEO is actually works as an AI officer. I'm seeing ads for chief AI officers and I'm kind of smiling at myself. I mean, people are looking in many ways for unicorns. They're looking for someone with a very strong tech background, but then they're also looking for someone with a strong legal background. And then they're also looking for someone with a strong change management background. It's very difficult to have the discipline in each and every one of these disciplines. It's almost impossible. So what we do is we go in to organizations and we work almost as a multidisciplinary AI officer across those 7 dimensions that you've just seen. We start with activate, we demonstrate value very quickly, maybe in one area of your organization. Then we move on to align, looking at governance and policy, then augment, onto accelerate and amplify. So the activate is literally showing where the value is. That's the most important part of our work with organizations. Governance obviously comes next. So once you're rolling out the AI, how do you make sure that it's responsible and it's ethical? But the first thing people need to see before they invest in AI, because it is an investment and money that you're going to put in here, maybe going somewhere else, is how is it going to help my strategy? How is it going to help my business goals? How am I going to achieve value in this? And that is top of mind when it comes to what we're doing. So that is the end of the webinar. About 2 minutes over. Apologies. And I'm going to go now to the Q&A. I'll just stop sharing my screen. As I mentioned, the recording will be sent to you. And I'll just quickly check. There's a couple of questions there. So for organizations deploying third-party AI and hiring, how should responsibility practically be divided between the provider and deployer, particularly around documentation, monitoring, and human oversight? And where do you see organizations most commonly misunderstanding that boundary? Thanks very much, Jabber. And thanks, you engaged with me on LinkedIn yesterday about this very point, and I'm delighted to address this. The whole idea around recruitment particularly is can be quite contentious, and I know you yourself referenced that Workday finding that was June 22nd of this year, Mobley versus Workday. I've been following that case very, very closely. So just to bring people up to speed, there was a class action against Workday for one of their AI systems. The class action was brought in America, saying that it was discriminating against candidates who were over 50. And it's been working its way through the courts in America. And on June 22nd, there was quite a landmark ruling, really saying, first of all, that Workday was responsible in terms of discrimination. But more than that, if people were using AI recruitment tools, the actual obligation is on them as well, not just on the tool. So if you're deploying the tool and it is discriminating, you are liable for that tool. Now, this comes with a relatively heavy obligation. We didn't get into a huge amount on bias, but bias is very, very real in AI systems. For example, my own AI system that I built, we introduced bias into our AI model to always look at something from an emotionally intelligent perspective. That you could argue is good bias, but it is bias. Um, and so, if you're using an AI model to rate applicants, you need to make sure that that AI model is not biased. against all kinds of different potential biases, ethnicity, age, address, all of that kind of thing. And you've got to really look carefully at the outputs of the AI and make sure that, and you're catching that. So that is an obligation. This is where human oversight comes in. So thank you very much for that, not that question, because there is misunderstanding. Kind of people are quite often, deferring this work to AI. And when it comes to something, particularly in a high risk system, which is what this is, that will need human oversight, and people will need to make sure that the system is not biased in particular ways. Um, Megan, hello, nice to hear from you again. And when you take into account that the human brain is hardwired for efficiency, and we're accustomed to decades of computers as deterministic rather than probabilistic, is it responsible to deploy AI with the end user as the accountability? Very good question. And there's a lot I agree with in this. And it's interesting when we, with Emotionize AI, started to roll out our model, and we had a model, we were really kind of ahead of the curve in many ways. We had a model ready to go in 2023, 2024, when the market was still, getting used to all of this. Um, you know, and this is where people really struggle in many ways with AI. We're a bit more used to it now in 2026. And you're right, Megan, it is a probabilistic technology rather than a deterministic. So up until AI arrived, we were used to when software said something, it does what it says on the tin. And a lot of this is, if you had a computer that gave you a wrong answer, you'd throw it out the window and you'd buy a new computer. And we discovered with our model, it was about 92% accurate when it came to emotional intelligence. And certainly having built an AI model, it's not something not for the faint-hearted. It is very easy to get to 70% accuracy. Getting anything past 70 is remarkably difficult, very difficult. But you see, AI has been established under the Geoffrey Hinton way of neural networks. It acts like a human brain. The best way I sometimes say to clients is to think of AI as the best intern you've ever had in your life. Okay. But you would not, abdicate a lot of responsibility to an intern. You would check its outputs, his or her outputs, before let's say you presented to the C-suite or the board or your boss. You would go back over it and go, what am I catching here? And that's the way to look at AI. It can be probabilistic. Now it's getting better and better. There's a paradigm shift here. As we use AI more, we start to trust its outputs more. The other thing here, of course, is if you point AI at a very specific data system and you know that data is right, that's called RAG, retrieved augmented generation, you can be far more sure of its outputs. If you're using an AI system to kind of go off the internet and check for answers, well, yeah, you definitely do need to check its outputs a little bit more. We have a system that we call CEO, check, edit, own. Every AI output that comes out needs to be CEO'd, and it should be CEO'd. And this is basic literacy training that we help organizations with. So it's not necessary, it's what we're looking at here is that paradigm shift, Megan, and it is that education piece. And that's why that whole people, culture, skills part of AI and helping people understand that is really, really important. To just let an AI model come along and go, knock yourselves out is quite often it's a recipe for potential disaster, but it also is a waste of resources because people need to be shown, they need to be guided, they need to be held by the hand, and they need to be told exactly as you've just described that this is a probabilistic technology rather than a deterministic one. So I think that is all the questions for the moment. As I said, Marie at thoughtfox.ai is my um, email. And if you have any questions or any observations, or you're interested in any aspect of the webinar and you'd like to kind of chat about it further, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd be delighted to help you with that. But I think that is everything coming up to 20 past one. I would like to thank you all very much for attending. We're delighted to have you all on board. And like I said, anything else, please feel free to hesitate. Have a look at our website. And the webinar will also be sent to you if you'd like to share it with your colleagues. Thank you all very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.